There was one single night when I stood completely alone in the cold stone cellar beneath our convent, holding a bundle of papers that could have destroyed a king, ignited a civil war, or saved thousands of innocent people from slaughter. The fire was already burning in front of me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of them. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. No matter what I chose, I would carry the weight of it for the rest of my life. By the time this story ends, you will understand exactly why burning those documents was the most difficult thing I have ever done and why I have never fully forgiven myself for it. But to understand why I lit that fire, you need to understand who I was before any of this began. My name does not matter now. What matters is that I was a woman who genuinely believed in quiet devotion. I entered the convent when I was 19 years old, not because I was running from something, but because I was running toward something. Toward stillness. Toward purpose. I loved the rhythm of our days, the early morning prayers, the sound of bells, the smell of candle wax and old books. I was the sister responsible for our archives. Preserving records, protecting manuscripts, cataloguing letters that dated back generations. I believed with my whole heart that truth deserved to be kept. That history belonged to God, not to powerful men who wanted to shape it in their favor. I never imagined I would one day be forced to choose between those two things. This was a kingdom built on appearances. The king had ruled for many years, and from a distance, everything looked stable, orderly, strong. But I heard things, even inside our walls. Merchants came through. Travelers confessed. Letters arrived at the convent from families desperate for help. And slowly, over time, I began to piece together a picture that frightened me. The nobility was fracturing. Military commanders were quietly choosing sides. There were whispers of a rival claim to the throne, a hidden bloodline, an old promise, a succession that had been deliberately buried. The kingdom was not strong. It was a beautiful wall with a crumbling foundation, and almost no ordinary person knew how close it was to collapsing entirely. I stayed out of it. That was not my world. I had my books and my prayers and my faith. Then one evening, a man arrived at our gate near death. He was a royal messenger, young, maybe 25 years old, with a wound in his side that told me immediately he had been attacked on the road. The sisters brought him inside. I sat beside him through the night because our infirmary sister needed rest. He drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, he grabbed my wrist so hard I gasped. He looked directly into my eyes and he said, "You cannot let them find what I carried." I thought he was delirious. I tried to calm him. He died before morning. It was while preparing his few possessions that I found the hidden compartment sewn into the lining of his satchel. A sealed leather pouch. My hands hesitated over it for a long time. I told myself I should hand it to the abbess immediately. I told myself it was not my concern. But something stopped me. Some quiet instinct I still cannot fully explain. I opened it. What I found inside was not one document. It was dozens of them. Letters. Orders. A signed confession. Coded correspondences between the king and a foreign power. And at the bottom of the stack, something that made my breath stop completely, a signed agreement that would have handed 3 entire provinces of the kingdom to an outside empire in exchange for military protection. Protection that the king needed because his own nobles were already planning to remove him from power. I sat on the floor of that small room for a very long time. These papers were not just politically dangerous. They were a death sentence for anyone caught holding them. They proved the king had secretly betrayed his own people to protect his throne. And they also named the conspirators inside the nobility, men who were themselves planning something terrible, a violent transfer of power that would have resulted in massacres in the cities, purges of anyone loyal to the crown. If either side found these documents, they would use them as a weapon. The king would use them to execute the conspirators before they could act. The conspirators would use them to publicly destroy the king and justify war. Either way, ordinary people would die. Thousands of them. I hid the pouch behind a false stone panel in the archive cellar that only I knew about. I told no one. Within 2 weeks, royal officials arrived at the convent. They were polite at first. They said they were searching for stolen property belonging to the crown. They asked about the messenger. I told them the truth, that he had arrived wounded, that he had died, that we had given him a proper burial. What I did not tell them was what I found sewn inside his bag. I watched their eyes as they looked around the archive room. One of them ran his fingers along the shelf nearest to where the pouch was hidden. I kept my face completely still. I prayed harder in that moment than I have ever prayed in my life. They left without finding anything. But they came back. And this time they brought someone with them I did not expect. Sister Marguerite. One of my own sisters. A woman I had prayed beside for 11 years. She would not look at me during that second search. When they finally left again, I understood what had happened. She had told them something. Not everything, she clearly did not know where the documents were, but enough to confirm their suspicion that I knew more than I had admitted. I felt genuinely sick. Not from fear for myself. From the heartbreak of it. Because I understood immediately that she had not done it out of malice. She had done it out of her own fear, and maybe her own conscience. She believed the crown's authority was sacred. She thought she was doing right. That understanding did not make the betrayal hurt any less. That night I took the pouch out and read every document again more carefully. And that was when I found the piece of information I had missed the first time. Buried inside one of the coded letters was a name. A child's name. And a location. There was a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, living quietly in a village far from the capital, completely unaware that he was the legitimate heir to the throne. The king knew about him. And the king had already issued a private order for the boy to be quietly removed. Permanently. My hands were shaking again as I read that. Because now the stakes had shifted entirely. This was no longer just about politics or power. This was a child's life. I had to make a decision. I spent 3 days barely sleeping. I prayed constantly. I went through every possible path in my mind. I could deliver the documents to someone trustworthy, but who? Every powerful person I could think of had something to gain from using them selfishly. I could hide them permanently, but eventually they would be found, maybe after my death, maybe at the worst possible moment. I could reveal them publicly, but I had no way to control what happened next, and the chaos could still cost thousands of lives, including that child. Or I could burn them. If I destroyed the documents, the king lost his proof against the conspirators. The conspirators lost their weapon against the king. The foreign agreement would remain unexecuted because no signed copy would exist. The boy's location, the execution order, all of it would be gone. Nothing would proceed as planned on any side. The entire machine of conspiracy would grind to a temporary halt. People might still die in the political chaos that followed, but the coordinated bloodshed that these documents were designed to enable would be impossible without them. The night the royal guards returned for a third time, this time with soldiers, I made my choice. I went down to the cellar with a candle. I opened the pouch one last time. I looked at those pages, all that truth, all that terrible history, and I fed them to the fire one by one. The wax seals melted. The signatures blackened and disappeared. The confession, the agreement, the coded letters, the execution order, all of it turned to ash while I could hear boots on the stone floor above my head. By the time they found me in the cellar, I was kneeling in front of a cold fireplace with nothing in my hands. They searched for hours. They found nothing. Because there was nothing left to find. I was held for questioning for 9 days. I told them only that I had burned personal correspondence left behind by the deceased messenger at the request of his family. I maintained that story calmly. After 9 days they released me. They had no evidence to the contrary, and they knew it. What happened next unfolded slowly, the way political collapses always do. Without the documents, the king could not identify his enemies precisely enough to act against them surgically. The conspirators, unable to prove his foreign betrayal publicly, lost momentum and began turning on each other. The foreign power, lacking the signed agreement, withdrew their private offer. The kingdom fractured, but it fractured slowly, without the catastrophic war those documents would have ignited. It eventually collapsed into something smaller and less unified. But it did not drown in the blood I had feared. I never learned for certain whether the boy survived. That uncertainty has lived inside me every single day since. There are mornings when I wake before the bells and I lie there in the dark asking myself if I made the right choice. I destroyed truth. Real truth. I took history and burned it because I believed I understood what was best. And sometimes I think that was the most arrogant thing a human being can do. Other times I think it was the only merciful option left to me. I genuinely do not know which is true. Both things exist inside me simultaneously, and I have made peace with the fact that they always will. I have kept this secret my entire life. The sisters who remain here with me do not know. The church does not know. No historian will ever write this story the way it truly happened, because the evidence is ash. But I know. History is shaped by kings and armies, yes. But sometimes more often than we are ever told it is shaped by a single ordinary person standing alone in a dark room, forced to make an impossible choice in complete silence, with nothing but their conscience to guide them. I am that person. And I made my choice. And I have lived with it every day since. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been standing in that cellar, holding those documents, listening to guards approaching, would you have burned them? Or would you have found a way to preserve them, even knowing what that might cost? Tell me in the comments. Because I have asked myself that question for a lifetime, and I would genuinely like to know what you think. And if this story made you stop and think about the true cost of impossible decisions, about what it really means to choose between truth and mercy, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Some stories should not stay buried in the silence where they began.